this, that I'm not alone, that immigration was it was an important and transformative moment for many of us. For me, certainly, I came from a very sheltered family, a very traditional family. I had known mostly Bengali people around me before I went to the United States. And I was thrust into a world that was very different. And I was forced to do things I had never done before. Away from the sheltering influence of family, I had to really stand on my own feet. I had to learn to interact with and try and understand people of very different backgrounds and different cultures who themselves had ideas about who Indians were and how Indians should be treated. And all of that was a great learning experience for me. It opened up my world, and paradoxically, and maybe this is true if any of you have lived abroad away from your home culture, or even if you moved from one part of India to another, as many of you I'm sure have, even to come to IIT here. When I lived in Kolkata, and I was surrounded by my culture, I didn't really understand it very well. And partly that is because I didn't ever think about it. I just took it for granted. It was all around me, kind of like the air we breathe. And in some ways, it was only after I went halfway across the world that I began to think about what my culture meant to me, who I was, and even to evaluate what parts of my culture did I value and which parts did I question. And so all of that comes out in books like my collections of short stories, Arranged Marriage and Unknown Eras of Our Lives, which really talk about the lives of immigrants, how immigration changes us, what are the things we gain, and what are the things we lose, how our relationships with people become transformed, become complicated, our relationships as we go with our parents back home, if we're married with our partners, if we have children with the children, and ultimately ourselves, because our notion of who we are in the world shifts a little bit when we move into a very different culture. So these were some of the things I was writing about. And then, as Professor Lahiri mentioned, I started working with women's groups. I started working with groups that helped women in domestic violence situations or other situations of abuse. And that had a very profound experience. That was a very profound experience. It left a deep mark on me as I worked with these women who came from sometimes very, very terrible situations, things that we wouldn't think of. And they were women that if they hadn't come to me and told me this was going on in their lives, I would never have guessed it, because many cases of domestic violence occur in the privacy of the home. One never even sees it. People have all kinds of ideas about domestic violence. I did too, which are not accurate. We think that maybe these things happen in lower economic circles of society. These things happen among uneducated people, and so forth. Or these things happen in some other community. Like in India, we have many communities, and we like to think that all the bad things happen in communities that are not ours. But as I began working with domestic violence, I realized that all of it was really not true. Unfortunately, domestic violence is something that crosses race borders, geography borders, economic borders, and it's very pervasive. And I think there was one experience that really shook me up and made me feel that I had to do something about it. And this was when I was living in the San Francisco area. I was volunteering for an organization called the Support Network. And it was a mainstream organization. It was run by white people, black people, and mostly people of white and black races came there. And then I had never seen any Indians. And this was right in the beginning, so I thought, well, maybe, that means there aren't many Indian women in this situation. But one day, I still remember very clearly, it was a Friday, and one of the people at this Support Network office called me and they said, please come in, there's a South Asian woman here, and can you come and talk to her because she doesn't speak much English. So I went in, There's this beautiful young woman, and she had a little baby in a car seat with her. And as soon as she saw me, she said, she spoke to me in Hindi, and she said, please tell these people to let me go back home, because I think I made a big mistake in coming here. And my husband's at work now, and I have to get back home before he comes back, because if he found out that I came here, he'll be very angry with me. So I said, okay, yes, we're not going to hold you here against your will, but tell us what the problem is. And then she started talking. And then in the course of her conversation, she raised her shirt and showed me her back. And it was completely lacerated, like someone had just cut across it. And we were so shocked, just to see something like that. And we said to her, your life is obviously in danger. You can't go back to this situation. And she kept crying, and she said, no, I have to, because I'll bring a lot of shame to my family if I don't. And also, I don't know how to make a living. How will I bring up this child? This child will suffer if I stay away. So anyway, we talked to her and we said, there are ways we can train you, we can get you a lawyer. What is happening to you is just not right. And so we managed to persuade her to go to the shelter. We had a shelter which was in a confidential location. And we told her, you go to the shelter. This was a Friday. We said, at least think about it over the weekend. And then on Monday, we can revisit the issue and we can talk about how to help you. So she went, and I gave her my number because it was one of those centers where you can call out, but because it was a confidential location, you can't phone in. Someone else couldn't phone in. So I said, just call me if you need anything, if you need to talk to someone over the weekend. And she did call over the weekend, but she didn't call me. She called her husband, and he came and took her. And we never heard from her, ever, after that. And because she had been too afraid to give us her name, we couldn't follow up. She hadn't given a name, she hadn't given an address. We couldn't do anything about it. We never knew what happened to her. We never saw her, we never heard from her again. But obviously I remembered that for years and years. I still wonder what happened to her. But she had a profound influence on me beyond even that, because of a couple of things she said before she went. She got into the car that would take her to the shelter. And she said something that really changed me as a person and as a writer. She looked back at me and she said, who really cares? Who in this country really cares what happens to me? Who even knows who I am? And later, when I would think about her, I thought about those words. And I thought, she's right. And she felt so desperate that she had to go back to her husband because she felt there wasn't anybody who cared enough to stand by her. And they didn't care because they didn't know her story. And it struck me that it's so important for us to tell these stories. Tell the stories of ourselves and our people and of the important things that happen, and to read those stories. Professor Jain was talking about the importance of humanities and literature. Literature is something that humanizes us as we read each other's stories, and we find out these secret tragedies that occur beneath the surface that might seem very ordinary. We learn compassion, we learn how to deal with people, we learn how to relate, we learn how to create a community out of strangers. And so after this, I decided that that's the kind of book I want to write. Those are the kinds of stories I want to write. So I did a lot of writing about women's issues and putting women in the centers of my stories, and about the immigrant community, looking at what are some of the challenges of the communities, what are some of the problems people are facing with intergenerational conflicts, with situations where children feel so disempowered that they join gangs. We often hear a lot of things about how well our immigrant community is doing, and that too is true. But beneath the surface, there's a lot of other things that are going on. And I felt that it was important to tell those stories as well. So a number of my other books deal with that. A novel like Queen of Dreams, for example, combines different things, because I like to combine different kinds of worlds that are part of our Indian culture and heritage. So in a number of my books, such as Queen of Dreams or Mistress of Spices, there's an element of the magical, the supernatural, of people with special powers. So Mistress of Spices, which as some of you know, was made into a movie with Aishwarya Rai in the main role. And if you don't, I think it's now available on YouTube, so you can go check it out. But so in that, the main character, Tilo, lives in an Indian grocery in the United States, and she has this special power that if you walk into that store, she can look at you and she'll know exactly what you need to be happy. And she'll give you a spice with a special power to make you achieve whatever it is that you wanted to achieve. So through the vehicle of the grocery, then, I have many kinds of people come to Tilo with their different problems. So, and then Tilo gets involved in their lives and tries to solve their problems and is able to help with some, but perhaps some of them, the results are not quite what she expects. And all of those complications make up the story. Queen of Dreams is set after as that novel is going along, 9/11 occurs. And so one of the themes of the novel is how did 9/11 impact our communities in the United States? While all of us were shocked at what had happened and all of us were mourning for people who had died for no fault of their own, there was also a wave of fear and hatred going across the country, targeted at people who looked dangerous. And a lot of times people of our community were targeted. And so 9/11 and its impact is one of the themes of Queen of Dreams. Well, but I like to, as a writer, it's important for me to try different things each time. So I'll tell you really quickly about my latest novel, and then I'll read you a little bit from it. Then ideas come to me, people ask me sometimes, where do you get the ideas from your novel? Ideas come to me from different places. For example, one of my novels, The Palace of Illusions, is the story of the Mahabharata, but it's told from Draupadi's point of view, so she is the narrator. I think that idea must have been in the back of my head from the time when I was a child and my grandfather would tell these stories. And I would wonder, oh, well, we hear so much about the wars and we hear about all the heroes, but what are the women thinking as all of this is going on? And so Palace of Illusions is a response to that. But my latest novel, One Amazing Thing, came to me on a day when I certainly didn't expect that I would get an idea for a novel. In fact, the idea of writing a novel was very far from my mind, because this was a day which was quite dangerous. I live in Houston, in Texas, and every once in a while we get these hurricanes. And on this day, a very big hurricane was coming right at Houston. It's called Hurricane Rita. Some of you might know about it. And just a few months before that, there had been another huge hurricane, Katrina. And as I'm sure some of you know, Katrina devastated New Orleans. It was just terrible. And many of those refugees came to Houston. So we saw what a hurricane can do. And now Rita was coming right at us. So the authorities evacuated all of Houston. Now, Houston is the 4th largest city in the United States. And if you evacuate, you can just imagine, evacuate the whole city, what happens? Nobody is able to go anywhere because the freeways are completely impacted. All right, so we left home in the evening, and around 3 a.m.